Okay, thank you, Anthony, and thank you, Karen, and also Sandhya and Amber, who've been sort of emailing me and helping organize everything. So I'm going to talk about a range of work, and as Anthony mentioned, I work in sort of multiple media, and so I'm going to show mostly photography-based work, some sculpture, and also then some collaborative work. And so I understand that there's kind of people have to leave because of classes. So if there's you have a question and you have to leave, please feel free to interrupt me. Okay, so I'm going to go straight into the work, and this is actually a piece from '96. Is there any Korean? Anyone who's Korean here? There's one hand. Okay, it'll be a bit unfair to ask you if you recognize what this is, as it's deliberately created that it's something that's very obvious for Koreans, and yet it's something that they wouldn't recognize depicted in this way. It's actually a grid made up of 16 kimchi jars, and then they're made as photograms. And kimchi is a sort of cabbage, a sort of pickled cabbage which Koreans eat. And it was in a show called Kimchi Extravaganza in the Korean American Museum in LA. So I was interested in how food is often this signifier of identity, and especially sort of identities around ethnicity. And I wanted to do some work around that, but didn't want to depict the usual ways that that Indians are about curry and Koreans are about kimchi and so on. So I wanted to make a marker identity which was at the same time unreadable. Okay, so, I have the slide things here. Okay, so this is a detail, and it's literally, it's a photogram, so it's literally the imprint of a kimchi jar on the photographic paper. And there's just the dregs of kimchi, and the bottom is just like the juice. So it's a literal representation of it, and yet it becomes totally unreadable. And so I was interested in the artist of color as being someone who is also unknowable and unreadable in the way that they might be doing depictions of identity and so on. Okay. So following in that vein of unreadability, this is a series of works called Dick and Jane. And so when you walk into the gallery, you see on one wall a series of what look like black paintings or black photographs, sort of mimicking monochrome paintings. Okay. And as you get closer, you realize that they're photographs, but they're also it's difficult to tell exactly what the photographs are. And these are printed slightly larger for the lighter for the slides. And gradually you realize that, and this one is printed lighter just so you can see the image. You realize you're looking at a mouth, but it's vertical. It's my own mouth, and it's me with a beard. But at first, when you see the images printed as they are, very dark, it's unreadable whether exactly what it is, and most viewers were seeing it as a labial or vaginal image, and so there's a sense of the male, and then once they realize it's a mouth, because the teeth become a sort of giveaway. They realize it's a male mouth because of the beard around it. But I was interested in the idea of the sort of the fetishistic object and the masquerade of the male masquerading as female. So this series is called Dick, and I mean, in a sense, it's about that sort of castration anxiety with the teeth and the vagina dentata, and so it's literally about the missing dick, actually. And the fetishistic object appearing out of the blackness. And then on another wall, you see the other component, which is Jane, And let me show you a detail of that. Um, and actually, I can't tell if they're in focus or not. Is that in focus? Yeah, you can read the text. So actually, if I just point out, okay, that's great. And each image was comprised of a series of texts, of sentences, and each one is in, well, together they create the shape of a vase. You can see the outline of the vase, which is a sort of stereotypical feminine or symbol of femininity, like the empty vessel. But each sentence begins with the pronoun he. So it's kind of re-inscribing masculinity. So it says things like, he was a master of the withering glance. He worked hard to overcome his gag reflex. He imitated a man who was fully experienced. He rehearsed every morning in front of the mirror. He was lulled to sleep by his parents moaning. And he never realized men could fake orgasms. Okay. So there are ways where the text is about this sort of enactment of masculinity, and a kind of attempt to re-inscribe it, or to actually inscribe it upon whoever this he character is. Okay. He waited for signs of invitation, but none were forthcoming. He suspects that the world has no substance beyond illusion. He wanted to pit art against death and see if it survived. He lost his faith in authority sometime during early childhood, and so on. So they're mostly around masculinity, both as it's embedded within the body, or it's inscribed within the body, but also just in relation to authority and often in relation to the parents. Most around sexuality, but some also anthropological nature, around how ethnicity is constructed. Okay. So the two, the Dick series and the Jane series, and obviously they're playing on the childhood recreations of the Dick and Jane stories. They're looking at the constructions of ethnicity and gender, or particularly a racialized gender. Okay. So they're kind of, in some ways, me looking at the body, and it's significant that the photographs are a series of black images, and these prints a series of brown images, and each one is a slightly different shade of brown. So that they also mimic skin tones. So they're playing with, with skin color, with gender, with race, but also attempting to be unknown in the same way that you're saturated with this information about the male character, but at the same time it's never fixed. You never quite can pin down who this figure is. Okay. So I'm going to go to very different work. So from the body, I began to look more at kind of social spaces and the way that the body is created as we're directed through those spaces. So I began to photograph places that one waits during journeys, and I was looking particularly at migration, and in some ways revisiting the places of my own migrations from Kenya to England to the US, and then my family's earlier migrations from India and Goa to East Africa. And then my parents also went to Portugal, so there's this sort of multiple migrations. And the photographs of waiting spaces, the series is called Threshold, where perhaps you've interrupted a journey, or you're waiting for the next leg of the journey, or you've entered a country, but you haven't gone through passport control yet, so you haven't legally entered it. And so you're in this sort of limbo between one legal space and another. Okay, so this is Lisbon. the train station in Lisbon. Okay, Heathrow Airport. And these are very small prints, and they're 3 inches by 4 inches. And they're very formal, as you'll notice. And I was thinking of Indian miniature paintings and the way that space is constructed within them. And color is also an issue, that I was thinking of them in the same way that miniature painting is very sort of jewel-like in the kind of coloring it uses. So I was printing them to emphasize the color. The previous one was JFK, New York, and this is Lisbon Airport. Okay. This is actually here, Chicago, O'Hare. Okay. This is Lisbon again, and this is the curtain where they take you to strip search you. Okay. And then this is actually O'Hare again, and was it a fetish? So I guess the idea, the sort of travel and tourism also being sort of fetishistic in its nature, in how one consumes cultures as one sort of travels through them. So you'll also notice that all the spaces are empty. And so I spent 2 years doing this series, and there's 24 in this series. And really I just spent a lot of time just hanging about in airports waiting for these spaces to be empty. And I mean, I did that because I was interested in the architecture of the spaces, and this is how we sort of never experience them in this way. We usually experience them as a crowd, and we're being rushed through them, or we're rushing through them to catch our flights. And I was really interested in almost like a first encounter, like going back to my first encounter with the West. At 7 years old, and it was from Nairobi to Frankfurt Airport. We landed at Frankfurt Airport. And I know Salman Rushdie, for example, has written about Frankfurt Airport in the same way as being the sort of first encounter. And so my sort of primary memory of the West is of the toilets in Frankfurt Airport, of being this sort of pristine white space, sort of endless white tile. And I thought, wow, this is, I mean, it became a sort of literal signifier of whiteness, and the West. And then recently I was back at Frankfurt Airport, and I was looking for this sort of toilet that I imagined, and I went from one terminal to another, looking for this sort of mythical toilet. And I was sort of incredibly disappointed, because they were so dark and dingy, and there wasn't any of this expanse of whiteness that I thought I remembered. So anyway, so the return is never quite how one imagines. Okay, so from that, I also have family in Ireland, and so I go there every year. And so this series is from Ireland, and it's kind of interesting for me to be there. Over the years I've been visiting Ireland. When I used to first go there, that people treated me with a noticeable amount of respect and almost deference, because they automatically assumed that I was a doctor, because the only Indians I ever came across were doctors. And in the last few years, maybe the last 3-4 years, that has completely changed, because now with Ireland taking in refugees, so now my status has completely dropped, because now I'm just I'm just seen to be another refugee. So the way that people treat me is very different. But this series is done around sort of 96, and I was interested in the sort of the political troubles around the border. And so these are a series of photographs pretty close to the border between North and South in Ireland. And I started noticing all these crashed cars, and I began to photograph them as kind of metaphors for the political troubles. Okay, as kind of intrusions of violence into the landscape. And landscape in this sort of otherwise idyllic and almost stereotypical sort of Irish landscapes. Okay, so this is actually a different car from the previous one. And there's a car rolled down the hillside, and the white things are sheep, actually. And this car actually, it looked to me like a dead cow or some sort of dead animal with its sort of legs up in the air. And I'll show you some sculptures later, which I did partly in reference to this image. And this is not the case anymore, but at the time the cars were just left abandoned wherever they'd been crashed. And now with a kind of a sort of the emphasis on tourism, they're now being cleaned up or being towed away. This is actually in a national park, and this is sort of okay. And then when I showed these images, there was a sense of a narrative going through them, and this was the last image of the cars, and here you see the sort of fender, which is 10 feet up in a tree, and the most likely possibility is that it's a test for the paramilitary groups testing car bombs, and they would do this in sort of these little country roads, just to figure out how much explosives to use. And I guess that like if you use too much, then it becomes visible that the car is laden with explosives, because the cars are visibly low to the ground, and so the paramilitaries are trying to get the sort of the right amount, but which will not be visibly detected by the soldiers or by the police. So they will conduct these tests. And then within the gallery space, when I show this series, that this would be the image following the previous one. And it seems like a sort of innocuous street. And whenever I showed this in the US, that no one, at least whenever I showed it pre-9/11, no one really understood this image. They just thought it was an image of sort of urban blight. And when I show this in Germany and certainly in Ireland, everyone, or in Europe and in Ireland, everyone immediately understands that this is the aftermath of a bomb. And this is the day after a bomb, and it's been totally cleaned up because Tony Blair was going to come and visit that afternoon. But then the windows are boarded up. Okay, so it's this it's a busy shopping street. And the bomb went off on a Saturday morning during the sort of peak shopping period, and it was really the most devastating bomb in Ireland. So this street became so iconic in Ireland. Everyone would recognize this street. And so I photographed it with a car in there, stopped at this traffic light, as a reference to the previous images. So I was trying to, create a sense of narrative without using text. And trying to figure out if I could do that just by the series of images, and just by the placement of the images in relation to each other. Okay, so this is now a very different body of work. So after doing that series, I came back to my home in LA, and began doing this series about the Irish landscape. And particularly in the northwest, which is a sort of very sort of boggy ground, very acid soil, so there's no trees growing, and the sort of color of the ground is a slightly reddish brown, and this sort of very kind of cloud-cast sky. So I was doing the series of Irish landscapes, and then started focusing more on American landscapes and the sort of desert, and particularly sort of southwest landscapes. And you probably realize fairly quickly that this is actually, these are constructed landscapes. This is shag carpeting. In the previous one is also shag carpet. So I was doing a series of landscapes where I was kind of interested in 19th century American landscape painting, where you have these sort of incredibly sort of epic vistas, and so I wanted to recreate them, and I was interested particularly in the depiction of the desert, as being a sort of a kind of a visual depiction of manifest destiny. You know, that here was this space that is kind of God-given. Um, you know, and it's always depicted as an empty space, that it's available for civilization or for civilizing. And the reason it's empty is because the Indians have been either removed from it or being decimated. And so I was interested in how to reinscribe a different kind of Indian, well, me, literally, back into this landscape where the other Indian has been removed from it. So I began, you know, so there was the shag carpeting, and then there's this other series where I'm creating these landscapes through very abject means, and I'm using elements from the body to do that. Let me show you a couple more examples. Okay. So I'm trying to create these sort of epic spaces, and as you can't really have where you don't have a sense of scale, but it just looks like a vast space. And in fact, the model that it's built from is probably maybe about 2 feet across. And just to give you an idea of the size, the little sort of bush-like structure in the front is actually my eyelashes, and those boulders are little clumps of earwax. So there you go, a little crowd of earwax. And I was thinking of the sort of buffalo migrations across the landscapes. So it's a literal, you know, putting in my own body into these kind of landscapes. And the ground of these is paper. Paper which is kind of stained, but using the kind of colors of my own body. Okay. Then I started incorporating other materials. So there's kind of little bushes you can see. Each one is a little clump of 10 fingernails or toenails. So it's like a little eruption of a sort of hands or feet. And you know, they're my fingernail clippings. And the ground is salt. So there are things from my own body which are, I guess, the detritus from my body, but I was also using things which are used to maintain the body. So the ground on this is cake icing, and the little sort of plant-like things are used dental floss, which are also dipped in chocolate. And then there's another series of landscapes which are much more specific to kind of political events. And this one is called "In a Country Without Rain, Nothing Good Falls from the Sky." And again, it's a built model which is photographed, and the model is built out of wax. And this is from December 2001, and it was during the bombings of Afghanistan. So it's kind of similar to the images that we were seeing in the news. Okay, so hence the title. Okay, and then also doing a number of cityscapes, and these are done I guess around May, June 2001. So they're pre 9/11. Okay, and they're made in New York. I was doing a residency at Art in General, a gallery in Lower Manhattan, and so I had an apartment in the East Village and would walk to the gallery with a supermarket trolley and would just load up stuff from the street, all these sort of found material. And so this is a skyline of New York, but it's all made from found wood, and it's found in the streets of Lower Manhattan. And I was thinking of Monet's Haystacks, for example, or his paintings of Rouen and Chartres Cathedral, where he paints them at different times of the day. And so I was doing them at different seasons or different times of the day and night. Okay. Yeah, I guess in that one you could see the most clearly that it's just pieces of board and pieces of wood. And of course, after 9/11, I mean the meanings of these change very dramatically. Okay, this is I first sort of came to the U.S. in '91 and flew into Newark Airport in New Jersey, and then caught the bus into Manhattan, and it goes through this incredibly industrial wasteland, and I'd never seen anything of the like before. This huge space, and I just thought, it's just like every science fiction post-Holocaust film I've ever seen. They suddenly began to make sense. So, I constructed this landscape partly as a sort of memory of that. And these are all, it's fabricated out of computer parts, sort of motherboards. Okay. And these are fabricated out of, recycled trash. You can see that. So there's bottles and egg cartons, and the ground is actually carpet, or what looks like water. Okay. And one of the influences for me, or one of my references, is actually the White City in Chicago from the 1893 Columbian Exposition. And I'm sort of assuming you all know about this. And for me, it was this sort of the kind of last gasp of the sort of the golden age, but a kind of it's 1893, so it's 30 years after the Civil War, and it's a kind of declaration to the rest of the world that here's a newly reunited U.S. As a kind of new empire, since so many of the buildings were based on Roman and Greek architecture. Okay, and the title of this piece is Everything West of Here is Indian Country. So it's a kind of reference to Chicago, but also it's a quote from a U.S. Marine after they landed in Basra and they're heading to Baghdad, and so literally that it was kind of open shoot. It's like, I mean, they're saying it's a turkey shoot that you see an Iraqi and their enemies, you shoot them. So I was kind of looking at, thinking of the U.S. as this, and this was done, 2003. So it's during the invasion of Iraq. Okay, and this actually is pre 9/11. It was the postcard for my show that was supposed to open in September 2001, and because of 9/11, we had to postpone the show. But I'd just come back from Ireland, and there'd been a series of bombs in Belfast, where I was staying, and so, I'd made this landscape in reference to Manhattan, and the objects, again, computer boards are found on the streets in Manhattan, but I'd just come back from Ireland, so it was the reference to the bombing in Belfast, and so I was equating the two spaces, but then again, after 9/11, everything, the meaning changes, or the way it gets read completely changes. Okay. This one is called Shadows Cross Medinat al-Salam. And Medinat al-Salam is the name of a city on which Baghdad now stands. And it's a 7th century city, which we really only know about through literature. There's no architectural evidence anymore. And translated, it means city of peace. Okay, so there was a kind of a poignant irony in that naming, and the way we think of Baghdad now. But again, this is constructed out of recycled materials, and I was also, I guess, purposely constructing it as a very sort of Orientalist fantasy of a sort of Middle Eastern city. Okay. And this is actually a piece I've just finished. It's for a billboard in LA, and it's just it's using the same kind of the White City, again, comprised, well, I guess a sort of military-industrial city, which is comprised out of these computer parts again. And the idea is that as you drive past, you're not quite sure whether you read "take cover" or "take over," and because since the C is slightly muted. Okay. So at the same time, I'm doing these constructed landscapes, and I'm really just showing you a few examples. I'm also photographing existing spaces and looking for the kind of narratives that are kind of hidden but still embedded within them. So this one is called Caesar lays the foundations for a new day, and it's a photograph of Caesar's palace in Las Vegas, and actually there's the Mirage Casino back there, and so the whole thing is literally a mirage, and this is the building site for the new theatre being built by Caesar's Palace, and this was in 2002. And the theatre was for Celine Dion's show, and her show is called A New Day. Okay, so the title is literal. Caesar lays the foundations for a new day. But it's also about, the empire expanding its borders. Okay. And this is photographed again, 2002, September 11th, 2002. It's on the first anniversary of 9/11, which is why the billboards say, God bless America. And there just happened to be a rainbow. It's the only time I've been in Vegas where it rained, and there's a rainbow on what looks like a mosque. Okay. So this piece is called The God Sends Signs. Okay, this is a view from inside the Aladdin Casino, and the title of this is called the Goncourt Brothers. The Goncourt. Let me get it right. The Goncourt Brothers stand between Caesar and the thief of Baghdad, and it's a reference to the UN, the French veto in the UN against the U.S. invasion of Iraq. So we have Paris Casino on the left with the Eiffel Tower, and the Goncourt balloon in the center, and behind or between them, this is Caesar's Palace, and there's the Aladdin Casino here. Okay. So it's literally the Paris Casino stands between Caesar and the Aladdin, and Aladdin is the thief of Baghdad in mythology. And if you'll notice on Caesar's Palace, it has the American flag flying on it. So there's a kind of literalization of America with Caesar. And I didn't put in the flag. The flag was there because of the anniversary of 9/11. Okay. Okay. So this is a series photographed in Kenya, and this is my first visit back. Let's see, in 2002, and this is called The Searchers, and it's kind of playing off the film, John Ford Western, 1956, with John Wayne, and anyone seen the film? Yeah, it's kind of it's a real classic of its, well, I guess not, well, for those of you who don't know it, it's about this 5-year search. John Wayne comes back from the Civil War, and so it's kind of partly about what it means to be American again after the Civil War. And so he comes back to his house, and his female cousins, have been abducted by this renegade band of Native Americans, and so he goes in search of her, to track her down, and we think it's that he's going to rescue her. Okay, and the search takes 5 years, hence the 5 panels. And during the course of the film, we learn that he actually doesn't want to rescue them. He wants to kill his cousins. because they've now been tainted by living with Native Americans. Okay, so the film is about this incredible fear, well, the terror of miscegenation. So let me show you some details of this. Okay, so this is the first panel on the left, and so what I did is photographing these people, and it's a mix of African, Asian, and European, and they're sort of microcosms of Nairobi society. And I was interested in the kind of whether the way that they're standing, who they're standing with, can reveal something about the kind of social relations. Okay. Oh, actually, let me just go back. And you can see it's on the outskirts of a city, and it is on the outskirts of Nairobi. So it's in this sort of liminal space again, a little bit like the Threshold series in the airports. That's not the city, and it's not quite rural. It's sort of this threshold space. So we have the sense that the people are searching for something. Okay, they're all, some of them binoculars, and they're looking in different directions, but we don't know what they're looking for. And you can see that, the Africans tend to be younger, the Europeans tend to be older. The Africans usually with themselves, grouping together. Here, there's a group for them sitting by themselves. The Europeans tend to be, clustered together and so on. And in the last panel, we have them looking back at the viewer, okay, through the binoculars. So it's never revealed what they're looking at, except that they look back at us as we're looking at them. And actually, they were just a group of bird watchers. So I didn't stage them in any way. I just I traveled with them to photograph them. Okay, this is a series of 3 panels, and each one is composed of 8 images. And the series is called Not at Home. And so I'm photographing, this kind of stereotypical notion of African housing. Okay, but nobody's home. Actually, and they're from different tribes. Okay, so they're different sort of tribal architecture. And then the second in the panel series is photographs in Nairobi of all these sort of gates, of security gates. And again, there's a sense of no one home. And then the third panel actually tells us the name of each tribe that builds this particular kind of architecture. And then you realize that there's no one home because this is a total fabrication. It's just there for tourists. Okay. So, I was just playing on the idea of the sort of the search, and in the previous series that, who are these people searching for? And it's partly about the tourist experience of the safari, that we're searching for authenticity. Okay. But authenticity is totally constructed for the tourist. Okay. So I'm just going to show you another series now, which is also related to Nairobi. But these are using old family photographs. And while I was in Nairobi, I got an email that my mother was ill, and but I was told, not to worry. But so while I was there, I began to photograph all these places that were connected to her, places that and she's born in Kenya as well. So places that she'd worked in, and where she went to school and so on. And then I got back to Portugal where she was, and she died a week later. So this is my mother, actually. And this series is called The Lost Pictures. And from a distance, it's just a photograph, and then if I show you a detail, you realize it's actually closer to a drawing. But what it's a photograph which has been erased, digitally erased. And I followed the lines of the image to erase them. Let me show you a couple more. Okay, there's my mother again. So these are all photographs taken in the period around 1963, usually 1962 to 1964. And 1963 is the pivotal moment because that's the year of Kenyan independence. Okay, so they're about this sort of this larger political moment around decolonization, but also they're about the family within that period. Okay, and there you can see that the photograph has been erased. And those have been erased by hand. And here there's another image in that series, and this is called Harambe, which is the sort of the political slogan for independence, which means let us all pull together. And it's an image taken on Independence Day, and there's, if you can see in the foreground, there's 4 kids, and on the one on the left is me at 5 years old. And in the middle is the sort of dark figure in the middle is actually a man in a gorilla outfit. And he's kind of there as a kind of signifier of Africa, which is kind of very bizarre. But in the background you can see the sort of traces of the sort of black, red and green, which is the Kenyan flag. Okay, so there's an erasure here too of the image. And what I did with the series was I made 8x10 prints and put them around my apartment for about 6 months. And the images get worn away by everyday activity. Okay, so as they accumulate material from the present, the image from the past gets erased. So this kind of conflation of time. And this image was in my shower. So it just gets erased by me taking showers. So there's a kind of sense of me washing myself and then washing away the image too. So literally washing away the history. This is my brother and me, and the figure in the middle, everyone asks me if that's my father, but it's actually a cardboard cutout figure. But it's, again, it's taken in independence, and it's this image of optimism of the new nation. This train kind of barreling towards you. And the train became very much a symbol in some ways too, as opening up the country. So it became the sort of symbol of progress and sort of modernization. And the top it says for tomorrow. And actually, there's another section where my sisters are standing in front of that section, and it's another image of a train, and it says "Change here." So so the whole thing says "Change here for tomorrow." And this was on my basin where I would brush my teeth. And so these are the splatters of toothpaste. And this is the image of the 4 of us on a beach. We're in the water, and so I think it's my uncle who's standing in the water to photograph us. It's kind of really unusual image. And there's my mother who's watching us, and there's my father here who's watching my mother who's watching us. And the surface of the image is kind of overlaid with hair and carpet lint. Okay. And an image of the street outside, the street in front of our house, or our apartment in Nairobi, and all the kids playing, a mix of African and Asian kids. I don't think I ever played with any European kids. But I'm in the one in the center who's kind of the only one with shoes on actually, and because I've been told to pose for this, dress up, go back home, and dress up for this photograph. So I'm on a bike, and the neighborhood kids, and this is a detail of that, and it's me shaving. These are all my beard hair. And the 4 of us, my sisters, my brother, myself. So actually these images I'm showing you were, I guess, erased over a longer period of time. Though what I did was I scrunched up the photograph so that the emulsion began to crack, and you can see that in sort of the white lines everywhere. And then let it accumulate the sort of material. This is actually a blood stain. That's me, by the way. No, these are 40 by 60. So the large print, so it really becomes this encounter with the surface. Um, they're then, yeah, they're scanned. They're scanned and then prints made from the scans. Yes. Yeah, so the big ones are really become very much about the surface and the accumulation of sort of detritus. Okay, this actually, I had my wisdom teeth out while I was doing these, and so this is a lot of blood stains from my mouth. There's a detail. That's me and me on your left, and my sister. So they become pushed to the point where they become very abstracted, or really just almost like painting, just about the surface. This is actually nosebleed. Okay, and this is a model that I'd built out of wax, and again with sort of bodily detritus. And it's a kind of imagined well, actually a misremembered the foundations of our apartment in Nairobi. And it's misremembered because I thought, well, there's 4 siblings and my parents, and I don't remember sharing a room, so maybe we all had a room each. So it's, but I think actually we all were in one room because the apartment was really small, but I sort of remembered it as being this huge space. So what I did, I had this sort of a block of wax which was built up layer by layer, and then I kind of excavated back into it, dug into the foundations to create the rooms. And the wax around is just the accumulation from the excavation. Okay. Okay. So just going to show you some sculptures, and this is actually the reference to that car sculpture, which reminded me of a cow. So this is cardboard which I've chewed, and the chewing kind of actually I've chewed the cardboard to shape it, and so there's nothing holding it together except the cardboard itself. So this is dead cow. Here's another version of it. And there's another one which is just made out of beard shavings. And another one. Okay, some more which are made out of tissue paper and semen. So they're kind of like, they're literally little throwaway objects. So this is one way that they were displayed in a gallery, just slightly raised off the floor. So they actually look like mice. Okay, some more. So those were more like mice, and these were more cows. And these were done for a show on Indian modernism. And when the curators asked me to be in it, and I said, I'm really not an Indian modernist. Why would you ever want me in such a show? I'm Indian, but that doesn't automatically place me in that context. And they they sort of said, well, we really, for various reasons, we wanted you in the show. And I thought, well, I don't want to be in the show, but maybe I'll make something specifically for it. So I made these and called them sacred cows. Again, they're tissue paper and semen. And then I started making these little human figures. And initially they were made to kind of, that the objects were the representation of the act that was used to make the object, if that makes sense. Yeah. So they were little men jerking off. But they also then became these very sort of abject objects. And so so the title is actually the Little Deaths, and the Little Death in French is the euphemism for orgasm. Okay, so here, and this one is called freeze. So they've been frozen in this moment, and they're kind of invoking the sort of the bodies of Pompeii and the sort of Roman freezers. These are small, as you can imagine. I mean, there's only so much semen you can generate. And this one is called crowd. Actually, about a month ago, I learned a really interesting thing about semen, which I'd never realized. I mean, I had no idea about it before, that it liquefies after about 20 minutes and then starts to get firm again. And the process of making these, I mean, there is a sort of learning curve to figuring out how to do these, that they have to be done very quickly. I mean, I literally have 2 or 3 minutes to make them, and then after that, the semen gets too sticky to work with. But I didn't realize that it then re-liquefies after 20 minutes. I could have waited 20 minutes and then worked with them again. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, next time. Okay, I think that was that carousel. We do have a few more in the next carousel, but any questions about any of these? Because I'm going to show you some.